Welcome to Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul Delegro, your host, and my guest today is Tim Titus from PathSolutions. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, Tim. You're one of the founders and CTO of PathSolutions. You've been doing this a long time. How long you been in business?
Well, the company's been in business really about 14 years now, but I've been doing networking for roughly 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you remember back in the days of coax, ArcNet, Novell NetWare. If people remember that, you're swapping floppies to compile the operating system. That's really where I started in networking. And I look back on those days and say, oh my God, things were terrible. But on the other hand, things were great because things were simple back then. You could just go fix a network with, hey, put a terminator on the end of the network, and that solves the problem. These days, sadly, it's a bit more complex than that because happily you don't have terminators, but the networks just get more and more complex every single year. And it's kind of like you have to read the tea leaves to find out what's going wrong when something breaks.
Yeah, it's not quite as easy as it used to be, as you said. And I think you're in a space that is there's a big need for. So it's, network performance kind of management or monitoring or whatever, however you want to term it. I see a lot of our customers, hey, how do we find the bottlenecks? Why are we slowing down? What's the problem? So that's the space you're in, and you've been doing this a long time. What possessed you to get into that? Like, because you've been in it a long time. This is not like you
a little bit of craziness. I think it's a little bit of craziness. That's usually where every business starts. But really what happened is that I realized when I joined a company, I realized, gee, we need something to monitor our network. And so you'd go out, buy some expensive software, spend a couple of days deploying it, and then you'd realize, okay, it's now deployed. I've got the database set up. I've got the web server set up. I now have to spend weeks to months configuring this system to actually extract information out of my network. And you'd put as much effort into that as you can, but eventually you got to get back to your day job.
Right.
And so sadly, a lot of deployments just ended up being, well, we're pinging things and we know when a link goes down and we can see a utilization graph on our WAN link, but that's the most visibility you have into your network. And you keep thinking, if I just had more visibility, I could solve more problems. Users come up to you saying, hey, I've got this weird slowdown that happens and I don't know what's going on. And you realize you're back to manual troubleshooting again. And if you don't catch the problem in the act, you're like, well, maybe the next time it happens, we'll get it solved. And that just tells the user, you don't know what you're doing. And I'm like, I don't like feeling that way.
Yeah.
You go to the next job and it's the same story, and the next business, and it's the same story.
So what was the genesis of PathSolutions then? Like, in other words, did you have an idea in your head that, hey, I can solve this problem?
Yeah, it really came about as I was frustrated by all of this manual troubleshooting that networks have. And I figured the information's out there. If there was an automated way to go collect the information and automatically analyze it, you'd have all sorts of information that you'd say, gee, I could solve problems today. Again, the knowledge is out there. Your switches, routers, gateways, firewalls. Every interface has tons of configuration information, performance information. If you could just have that information extracted and analyzed, then you'd have a list saying, here's everything that's broken in your network. And I kept dreaming for this tool that would just tell me what's broken so that I could spend my time fixing it. After a while, I realized nobody was going to build this automated troubleshooting solution. And I figured, okay, so I'm going to quit my job and found a company and see if I can have a go at this. Happily, I found a lot of people said, I want the easy button. I want automated troubleshooting. And so we found a lot of folks that just end up jumping on our bandwagon saying, yeah, this is the easy way to troubleshoot and solve problems in the network because it tells you where the problem is and what's broken.
So you quit your job and started a business. That's easy, isn't it?
Well, okay, that's easy as far as I'm concerned. The negotiations with the wife took a long time.
I didn't want to mention that. That was actually a subject I was kind of trying to stay off. But now that you bring it up, yeah, I can only imagine if I said to my wife, "I'm going to quit my job and start a business." Now, granted, you were a lot younger then.
That is true.
And you may or may not have had any kids, so that played into the factors.
Actually, it was younger. It was also no kids. And so it was a lot easier to make that decision, where I don't know if I'd make that decision the same way now. But in one sense, I look at it and say, since we've ended up solving a lot of problems for a lot of network engineers, that's the validation that really warms my heart.
Yeah.
It tells us that we're doing the right thing and solving problems for folks where they couldn't solve it without it.
Yeah, I can tell you from my experience dealing with customers is that's a big issue, right? Not having blinders on, saying, "Hey, where are the issues?" And you know how it goes, right? Everyone starts pointing fingers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the storage. It's the network. It's the
server. It's the firewall. They're just making guesses, and the problem with that is that with guesses, it's like you'll never come up with even a good positive direction to go research. You just said, "Well, last time it was the firewall, therefore it must be the firewall again." No, it could be any number of things. Yeah. And so the problem is that in today's business, you have staffing shortages where you might have a team that says, "Hey, we're supposed to have 8 members of this team. We've got 3. And those 3 people are just desperate to say, I want my evenings back. I want my weekends back. I'm overworked and I'm about to quit." And you have a management department that's saying, "Hey, we got to find some way of reducing the burden on these folks, but we still got to solve the business problem."
Yep.
And the whole trick is automation.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on that. So what do you guys, I mean, again, I'm sure there's a lot of competitors out there. What's the secret sauce for you guys? Like what would you say separates you? And I try not to make these be commercials for our guests, but in a way it is, right? I mean, what separates you guys from someone else?
There's a reason that our company was founded, and I've kind of explained a bit of that. But there's a validation in the market as to what we're doing that's unique. And that validation really is that companies that are short-staffed, companies that say, "Gee, I've got a couple of junior level guys, I got one senior level guy that's overburdened, and I need to solve more problems. I need to get more out of my team." The whole trick is automation. Yeah. Now, okay, so there's a lot of business buzzwords of automation out there. What do we do that actually makes this easier to troubleshoot? Well, we deploy software that will collect automatically a lot more information on the network. We're going after 19 error counters, configuration, performance, QoS information, CDP, LLDP, bridge table information. And we do that on every device as well as every interface. So we go broad, covering the entire network, and we also go deep. Now, that's great.
So you're looking at servers, networking.
It's typically it's the networking devices. So your switches, routers, gateways, firewalls. Okay. You can also have it monitor servers. We have great server monitoring as well. But the trick really is that we're looking deep into the entire infrastructure so that you know what's going on everywhere. Again, a lot of other monitoring solutions, they're going to give you utilization on your WAN links and maybe a trunk port here and there. We're going to tell you about packet loss for any reason in the infrastructure. And also, because we get all those error counters, we figured, let's build some smarts into this. We've got all this information. If we built a heuristics engine, we'd be able to tell you plain English answers of what's broken. What this means is our software can deploy, and within the first hour, we're going to tell you, hey, do you realize you're dropping 17% of the packets on your firewall interface because it's running 100 meg half duplex? Do you realize that on this trunk port over here to your primary switch, that you're dropping 6% of the packets due to a cabling fault? So plain English answers so that you can go proactively solve the problem. That means you get more problems solved because you're not spending all this time trying to collect the information and interpret what's going on. But the other trick, though, is that these problems with plain English answers can now be pushed down to the help desk.
Right.
I haven't found a network engineer anywhere that loves doing trouble tickets. If you are one, add a comment onto this podcast because you're the one.
Yeah.
But if you could have a senior level engineer saying, less tickets, sign me up. That means help desk folks are going to be able to solve many of these problems themselves. That means that the help desk is operating above their capacity because there's intelligence added to the ticket that says, this is a cabling fault. Here's where it is. Go fix it. They don't have to do the interpretation of error counters. It doesn't require escalation. Yeah. That means the problem gets solved faster, lower in the organization. Right. Management should be excited about that because it means it costs less to get the problem solved. The senior engineers should jump for joy because that means less tickets for them. The help desk should be overjoyed because that means they get to solve the problem the moment they talk to the customer and say, oh, we found the problem. And I know that help desk folks, they can't stand it when they have to escalate because it means they didn't solve the problem. But if they can be the one to solve the problem, then they're the magician.
Right.
So it's one of those sort of things where once we come into an organization, this provides such a change to the organization that everyone is happier, from help desk to management to network team, that, gee, everyone's doing more work due to the fact that the tool is doing more of the heavy lifting.
Right. Yeah. So you touched on one thing. It's a hardware issue, like there's a cabling or things of that sort. What if it's a software issue? Is there any remediation going on there? Or is that just alert someone that, hey, here's the problem and you got to go fix it?
So half the time in people's worlds is you say, gee, we've got a problem. Let's say it's a slow application. Yep. And people are saying, hey, this is crawling. Occasionally I get the connection dropped. And so what happens with troubleshooting is you have these giant worlds of, well, it could be software. It could be the client software, could be the browser, could be the network, could be the firewall, could be the cloud server, could be the application, could be all sorts of places. Yeah. So what you need to do rapidly is be able to start ruling things in and ruling things out.
Okay.
So we have tools that can very quickly rule out the network and say, according to what information we have, you haven't had a single packet drop anywhere in the network between that client and that server. Therefore, we can rule out a network problem. We can also confirm it. There's no latency, there's no jitter, there's no out of order packets. So we have all sorts of ways of being able to rule out the network. We also have some application testing ability to be able to say, okay, this is a caching problem. The reason your page is building slowly is you're not having proper image caching, or it's a JSON problem. And the JSON usually means that there's a database problem. So we can end up targeting into it's a database problem on the far end that's causing the issue. So we can do very quick rule out of large sections of area so that you can say, we're not going to focus on the network. This is definitely something with the application. And it looks like it's a caching issue, and it's these files that are causing the issue. And we can start looking into what's going on with our caching servers or what's going on with the internet caching. So it does allow you to rapidly come into that. Here's where the problem is coming from, and here's where the problem is not coming from.
Right. And that just, knowing where it's not coming from is equally, if not more important. Yeah. I mean, that's good stuff. So when again, I think I asked this a little earlier, you find out where the problem is. Now, do you do any remediation at all? Or is that signaling to someone that, hey, this is where the problem, and this is what you got to look at?
Right. So where we are today is we're going to root cause identify the problem. Okay. And make sure somebody is notified of that. That way the problem can start getting addressed. And the thing is we're not going to do remediation yet. We are looking into doing that at some point in the future. But the problem with remediation is that it's still, I'm going to say, very early on in the industry because you need additional information to do remediation. What I mean by that is if somebody is doing, let's say I'm going to switch to an analogy. You have a freeway system and somebody says, hey, it's really slow when I commute to work. If you had a root cause analysis, it could say, oh, the reason your commute was bad is there was a huge construction project on I-95 that slowed everyone down, and that's the problem. Now, if you had automated remediation, you'd have a system that would go in and say, oh, let's clobber the construction project and put these lanes back into use. And it's like, well, no, wait, we don't want to do that. So there has to be some decision-making capacity there.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, actually, is like before you go and automate something and to remediate it, let's double check to make sure that it is the right thing to do.
Yeah. And that's really where that human addition is important.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I see is, a lot of companies are kind of reactive to things versus proactive to things. I see that as a big problem, right? It's the hair's on fire, we got a problem, versus being proactive about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Companies have been struggling to be proactive for a very long time. And I'd say the reason they're stuck in that mode is their tool set holds them back. So One of the things we have as a saying here at PathSolutions is, if you knew what your network knew, you could be proactive.
Right.
The information's out there. Your switches, routers, all those devices, they have all sorts of information about what's going on. Nobody has time to manually go collect and analyze that information. But if you had a system that would automatically scour all of those error counters, the configuration, the performance, pull the information back, analyze it, and say, hey, did you realize you got a VLAN tagging problem on this trunk port over here and you're dropping 8% of the packets? You could proactively fix the problem before a single user even complains.
Right.
And so that's kind of our mantra is to switch people from being in that reactive mode to, I know my network. People might think they know their network, but if they don't know that they're dropping packets, they don't know that there's a misconfiguration. I mean, sadly, I'll tell you, we have a lot of customers, they deploy our software and they say, oh, I'm using some other package, but I want to see what your software can show. We've had a couple of customers just in the past month, 2 customers, where they deployed our software and they found a critical gateway that's running 100 meg half duplex. And I went and said, that means that your existing monitoring software package has no awareness of a half duplex connection. And they're like, well, yeah, it doesn't do that. Okay. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
And so it's the knowledge and the awareness of your network. If you knew that was there, you'd go fix it.
Yeah.
The problem is finding it in the first place. Do you want to manually try and find it because your monitoring solution doesn't? Or do you want the automated way of saying, tell me what the network equipment knows so that I can start being proactive about fixing these problems? And again, this was, if my passion comes out, it's that I've been frustrated being reactive most of my career. And I figured people don't like living in that environment. If you knew what your network was trying to tell you, you say, okay, I got 10 problems fixed today. How many network engineers can tout that they fix 10 problems in a day? And it's usually that most of their time is spent collecting the information to analyze what's going on. Fixing the problem is fast.
Yeah.
I mean, you put a new patch cord in, you solve a cabling problem. You change a configuration on a switch or a router, that's a 5-minute fix. It's finding the problem.
Yeah.
Is
the needle in the haystack, right?
Bingo.
Yeah. No,
and which haystack are you even searching in is the next problem.
Yeah, we've all been in those meetings, Tim, where you're looking at spreadsheets and all these boards, dashboards, and everyone's sitting there trying to figure things out for hours.
Well, it's partially a blame game of, it's their fault, it's the other fault. So politics usually gets into the picture. I got to tell you, if I solve that problem with some software, if I can solve the political problem, we'll be $1 billion company in really a month. But I can't say we'll solve the political problem, but we will solve the information problem, because we'll tell you, here's the clues of what's going on, and here's our hypothesis of what's going on, so that instead of having the meeting, you just say, oh, okay, we are dropping packets. Here's where we're dropping the packets. Here's why we're dropping the packets. Why don't we fix the problem? I think this is going to solve it.
Yeah.
No more meetings.
Yeah. No more meetings, no more finger pointing, and no more infighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I am curious about how to solve the political problem. Yeah. That'd be magic.
I think we have to have another show on that one. So, as companies are going through their maturation process and their networks becoming more and more complex, I mean, what advice, what are some of the things you'd tell a customer, as they start to grow their environment and become more complex?
Well, I mean, that's the sad statement of how every network evolves. I mean, you start with a tiny little company with a single switch and a firewall, and you say, oh, we're good to go.
Yeah.
But once you start growing beyond that and say, hey, we've got to have separate VLANs. We've got to have separate routing policies. We've got to have a separate voice VLAN. We've got to have separate, security set up between those VLANs, because now we have a high security system, banking systems, all sorts of different business needs. and the complexity just creeps in like crazy. Each business needing its own complex system. So what happens then is that you have a team that's building that network, and they say, oh yeah, I'm Bob. I'm the guy that knows how everything works. I know where the skeletons are. I know everything, and it's in my brain. If Bob ever leaves that company, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Tribal knowledge is gone.
If Bob gets hit by a banana truck, yeah, you're in trouble. And so the problem is many organizations start realizing that that's a huge risk that they can't deal with. And so if they had a way of looking at the network, saying it builds that tribal knowledge because it understands how your network is configured, how it's performing, how every link is going, how every switch and router is configured, and have all of that information tied together, that just means that, okay, if Bob's on vacation, let's say Bob's okay, but he's on vacation. You don't want to disturb Bob. You want to use a system to say, tell us the magic of what's going on so that we understand our network to a broader and deeper level. And really, it's the automation of troubleshooting. And everyone talks about automation. It's a buzzword that's been kind of overused in a certain sense. But if you're not moving towards automating various different tasks, automating your troubleshooting is a key point, because I think most IT organizations spend more than 50% of their time doing the troubleshooting. And if you think about that 50% of your time and say, well, what is that 50% spent doing? It's collecting information. Then you have maybe a small portion of that, 5%, which is analyzing. And that means, oh, yeah, this happens here, this happens here. We put it together. Oh, that's what the problem is. That analyzing is a very small period of time. Then you go fix the problem. And again, that's another 5%. Yeah. So the vast bulk is collecting the clues. A Sherlock Holmes mystery wouldn't be very interesting if in the first 2 chapters, they collected all the clues and they did all the analytics, and it was just a chase to find the guy at the end. It's that so much time is spent collecting the clues and collecting the right clues. Sometimes there's clues that'll mislead you, and you need help with that. And so that's that, get the right information on the table so that you can look at it and say, oh, I know what's going on.
Yeah. And, you got me thinking about some of my personal, experience with customers. And, one thing you see is a lot of turnover, right? So if you had the right tools in place, I think you wouldn't have to take a step back when you have to hire another employee.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's the automation of the troubleshooting, which means that the knowledge is in the tool, not in somebody who could leave the business. And again, having that ability so that the junior level folks can solve problems just means there's more of a collaborative effort, and you're not stuck saying, well, Bob's the only one that can solve that problem. Bob's the only one that can solve the other problem. You're not, beholden to Bob to say, gee, if Bob decides to leave, you're in trouble. It's okay. We're okay. We can process through this, and we're not going to be stuck.
Yeah. So a company like yours, generally speaking, do you guys do like proof of concepts where you just say, hey, we'll put our money where our mouth is? And
definitely. So we'll do a 30-day proof of concept. And the trick really is that during that proof of concept, we can be fully configured and fully set up to monitor your entire infrastructure within 1 hour.
Wow, that's amazing.
A lot of people say, no. The reason they give 30 days is it takes 30 days to start getting information out of it. We're going to have it fully configured within an hour. That means you have, 29 days and 23 hours left to be able to start troubleshooting and fixing problems, which we're okay with. If you solve and troubleshoot problems and say, hey, you get more problems solved in that first couple of days of deployment, we're happy.
Yeah.
Because that means we've proven value.
Yeah, and I would say that would be pretty typical, right, Tim? That like as soon as you implement a number of problems are going to arise in most environments, I would think.
Yeah, right? And it's the reason this exists is that other software packages don't go deep enough or broad enough to be aware of the problems.
Yeah.
So if we told you where you're dropping packets, where you have bottlenecks, where you're having misconfigurations, all of that automation just means that you're going to know your network to a deeper and better level than before the solution. And we figure that knowledge is critical, especially if you have a VP who's standing over your shoulder saying, you're going to solve the problem in front of me right now, right? And I remember those days, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I hated that. Usually it's like, give me a couple of hours and I'll see what I come up with. And that doesn't have the VP walk away from your cube happy. That has him walk away saying, you really don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I figure if you had the right ability to say, type in a couple of IP addresses and say, okay, we found the problem. It's on this port, this switch, and it's a misconfiguration. I'm going to get it solved now. That tells the VP, it's like, wow, you know your stuff. You're the smart guy here.
So you've been around this network monitoring space for a long time, Tim. Why do you think more companies don't do it, or do it to the extent it should be done, if that makes sense?
So in one sense, what's happened to the network monitoring marketplace, first of all, I can't answer for the other companies, but what I've seen them do, and this shows intent, I guess, is that they'll do your basic monitoring, and then they move on to say, oh, let's do cloud monitoring. Let's do security. Let's do things that are more broad. And so what they end up with is a tool, and I will say it's just a tool that is like a veneer finish. It's a millimeter deep and a mile wide, and it says, oh, we can do anything, but they don't do anything very well.
Right.
Whereas we figured, we're going to sell to people who run networks. We're going to sell to people who have to support networks, support servers, and really that's our limit. We're not going to be going into antivirus. We're not going to be going into areas that are really outside of what these people want. And we figure we're going to go deep. And so the question is, do you want the jack of all trades tool that does very little for you, but it does everything? Or do you want one tool that's going to say, this is how I run my day because it's the master of this domain and it's going to really help me operate far more efficiently?
Very good. Well, Tim, this has been great. I've learned a lot. And if someone wanted to get in touch with you, Tim, how would they do that?
Well, so they can actually freely shoot me an email. I love talking to network engineers, especially folks that are trying to have troubleshooting sessions, trying to solve problems. So Titus at PathSolutions.com. Always willing to chat with folks. If you want more information on the solution, though, you can go to www.pathsolutions.com, and we have an online demo sandbox. You can actually tour the product. We have some great videos you can poke around with, or you can end up reaching out to sales and they'll set up an overview where we'll show you all of the tricks and features and then get your own copy to play with for 30 days.
Sure. I don't know, those sales guys, you can't trust them, Tim. I say that with tongue in cheek, obviously,
The older I get, though, the more I've learned. I'll admit, as an engineer, I used to hate salespeople, but the older I get, the more I learn. Salespeople are the super connectors that make things happen. And if you didn't have these folks, you'd never have good connections of how do I solve this problem? Because in my career, I'll say is I found a salesperson who could always find a solution to a problem, and I stuck with that person no matter which company they went to because I figured they can solve every problem. They know how to get these problems solved. So that really changed my perspective on, they're the super connectors.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Like I always look at my job as like I manage the account, right? I'm not a technical guy. I understand enough to be dangerous, but my job is to kind of facilitate, right? Connect people, find solutions, find the right people to solve those problems, and hopefully it all works out in the end, and we all get paid.
A super connector.
Yeah, super connected. So, well, Tim, this is great. Any last words for the audience out there before we go?
So we have, if you do sit through one of our demos, we'll get you a turtle stuffy. The PathSolutions turtle stuffy. So good for dog, good for kids.
All right.
One of our tricks.
All right. Well, I'll have to go take the demo or something so I can get one of those turtles for my dog, so. All right. Well, Tim, again, thanks for being on. This was great. Really appreciate your time. And that's a wrap for Business Brains and the Bottom Line. Until next time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.